Rayman, probably one of the weirdest looking characters ever created, made his first appearance in 1995 in a game titled after his own name. Even though the series had several successful games following the original Rayman, in 2006 the Rabbids started to take over the Rayman franchise, and it seemed as though Rayman was gone for good. However, in 2011, Rayman made his resurgence in Rayman Origins. Even though Rayman Origins had been highly acclaimed by critics, it only sold about 1.7 million copies across all platforms. So why was this game overlooked? Were people unaware of how good this game was, or were critics too generous with their praise of this game? For those who don't know, Rayman Origins is a side-scrolling platformer that can be played single-player or with up to 4 other players, like New Super Mario Bros. Wii. However, unlike New Super Mario Bros., Rayman Origins handles 4-player co-op a little differently, in my opinion better overall. For one, in Rayman Origins, players don't really occupy any real space, which means that you can run and jump through other players without them getting in your way. Second, since there aren't any lives, players don't have to worry about leaving other players behind during difficult parts, as they can come back to you by floating over to the other player. Finally, co-op isn't as much as a burden as it is in other side-scrolling platformers. In other games, I would dread having a co-op partner because there's always a chance that their mistakes can lead to your death, and then you're out of a life, or vice versa. But in Rayman Origins, death isn't so much of a punishment, so when you do end up dying, it's not as frustrating. Rayman Origins was my first introduction to Rayman, as I had never played a previous game in the series, but I heard a lot of good things about it, so I decided to give it a try. The game starts off kinda slow as you have to unlock Rayman's powers, since it can only run and jump in the beginning. The game is also pretty linear, as you have to beat all the levels in a world to unlock the next world. However, after you beat the initial 5 worlds, 4 more worlds open up that you can visit in any order you choose. As for the difficulty, the game starts off pretty easy, but as it progresses, the game gets substantially more difficult. However, because the game doesn't have a life system, the difficulty is based on your skill as a player, and not based on how many chances you have to play a level. Since Rayman Origins doesn't have lives and therefore gives you an infinite amount of chances, the game can get away with having levels where you die 20 times before beating them. What I mean by this is that usually when a game has a life system, the game has to sort of tailor the stages to make them easier, so levels can be beaten without having to grind for lives. Otherwise the game feels cheap. That's not to say that games with lives are easier overall than games without them, but there has been a recent trend in side-scrolling platformers to just hand out lives and continues like they're candy, defeating the purpose to begin with, so it's nice to see Rayman Origins getting rid of it altogether. One thing you'll notice about this game is how beautiful the art style is. The video probably doesn't do it justice because of the terrible quality, but the characters, environments, and set pieces really do blend nicely together, and everything is seamless. That being said, sometimes the environments blend too well together, as sometimes it can be difficult to spot the environmental hazards until you run into them and die because of them. This problem is also exacerbated in flying levels, as in the later ones where shit is flying all over the screen, you can end up losing track of yourself and get hit by a projectile or run into something. As far as level design is concerned, Rayman Origins has a lot of variety in its levels. There's the standard running and jumping segments, side-scrolling shooting segments, swimming segments, parts where you have to stay on a moving platform, and so on. The powers Rayman gain also allow for greater variation, as he can shrink in size to access new areas. He gains the ability to hover, and he also learns how to run along walls and ceilings. The variety in level design keeps things fresh and exciting, and it felt like the concepts weren't overused, as most levels were unique in their design. That being said, there are an awfully large amount of scrolling shooter levels in the game that didn't really do anything gameplay-wise to make them more interesting, other than increasing their difficulty. The game also does a good job of introducing new concepts before you advance through a level. Usually, if a new concept is being introduced in a level, the first corridor you travel through will briefly introduce the new concept, so you can figure out what to do before you advance. For instance, in this swimming level, at the end of the first corridor, you see this stone fish thing that sucks in air before you leave, preparing you for the next section that has these stone fish that you have to swim by. Even though most of the time the game just gives you a peek of what's in store for you throughout the level, before throwing you in the deep end, it's usually enough to teach you what to do, and so you're not surprised when you encounter it later on. Besides the main levels, the game also has a lot of extra stuff you can do. For one, every level has hidden bonus rooms that have different objectives, in which the end result is you unlocking another cage of Electoons. These bonus rooms remind me of the hidden bonus rooms in Donkey Kong Country, except all of these rooms are unique in their designs, whereas there were only a few set types of rooms in Donkey Kong. After you beat a stage, you can also unlock the time trial for that level, where you have to reach a specific point in a level in the specified time in order to unlock another Electoon. Finally, every world has a treasure chest chase sequence that you can unlock once you gather enough Electoons. Unlike regular levels, these levels require much more concentration and precision in your movements, as even a slight misstep means instant death. The beginning levels aren't too bad, but later on you'll most likely have to repeat the level several times over in order to get a feel for the levels. Your reward for beating these levels are these red teeth, which unlock the hardest level in the game and is sure to offer a challenge to anyone who plays it. Even though I don't really care about completing time trials, and finding the bonus rooms is pretty easy, I still appreciate the fact that they were added into the game, as they offer you more to do once you complete a level. There aren't too many bosses in the game, but that ends up working out in the game's favor, as they all use Rayman's powers in different ways to defeat them. For instance, in the fight against this plat thing, you have to dodge its attacks by running around the ground or the ceiling, and then hit its weak point. While in the fight against this fat bird, you have to hover around the arena to dodge the bird's attacks, and then hit its weak point. The bosses are also pretty tough, as you'll have to memorize their attack patterns and dodge their moves accordingly, or else you'll end up getting killed. Even if you do have a heart, most bosses will automatically kill you if you get hit, which kinda sucks and completely defeats the purpose of having a heart in the first place. Moving on to controls, the controls are pretty simple and responsive. Holding down any of the trigger buttons lets you run, X makes you jump, and hover if you hold it while you're in the air. And square attacks. That's pretty much it, but even with its simplified controls, the game rarely feels repetitive. As I said before, the controls are also pretty responsive, but sometimes they might be a little too responsive. For instance, when you jump with X, if you tap it, you seem to do a shorter jump than if you hold it for a longer time. Sometimes this can be a problem when you're trying to make a jump over a pit, but at the same time you're trying to avoid hitting spikes above your head. Conversely, if you don't hold the X button for a long enough time, you could end up missing your jump and dying. This can take some time getting used to, but overall it's not that big of an issue. So what's the deal? Is this game overrated? No, I don't think it is. Although the game doesn't do anything new or revolutionary, the gameplay is still fun and varied throughout each stage, and is still difficult at the same time. I also like how the co-op is handled, as co-op in a lot of side-scrolling platformers is often filled with an abundance of lost lives, so I'm glad lives were completely removed in the game. The addition of hidden bonus rooms, as well as time trials and the treasure chest chasing sequences, also offer more of a challenge for players looking for something more than the standard gameplay. Overall, I think this is a solid side-scrolling platformer which is worth playing.